So I posted a video talking about the Civil War, what its root was. Now I'm going to talk about the bases that we're trying to rename that Democrats and a lot of independents, and even a lot of Republicans are pushing to rename, and that Donald Trump and a group of deeply dug in, I can only term them as racists or profoundly ignorant people, are trying to defend. So here's the story behind the men these bases are named after. Fort Benning, named for Henry Benning, was a politician, judge, and a brigade commander from Georgia. Here's a portion of a speech he gave at the Georgia Convention that determined to secede from the United States and join the rebellion. What was the reason that induced Georgia to take on the step of succession? This reason may be summed up in one single proposition. It was a conviction, a deep conviction on the part of Georgia that a separation from the North was the only thing that could prevent the abolition of slavery. This conviction, sir, was the main cause. So not only was he a slave owner himself, he thought that slavery was good, but that it was worth rebelling against the United States to protect. Is that the sort of man we should enshrine in the annals of history and memorialize with a major military base in the United States? Fort Bragg is named for the frankly unbelievable Braxton Bragg. Bragg married into a sugar plantation, owned a considerable number of slaves. He rose to high rank in the rebel armies, and armies under his command killed thousands of U.S. troops. Fort Hood, named for John Bell Hood, is an odd choice. Hood claimed he would join the Confederacy if his native Kentucky did. Kentucky didn't, but he joined the rebellion anyway. This may have been to do with the family's 600-acre ranch, which would have been extremely expensive to run without slaves. Unfortunately, the destruction of records have made it extremely difficult to verify whether he did own slaves, but he remains a man who betrayed his country, not even following his own state, but the ideals of the rebel states that fought against the United States in support of slavery. Fort Lee, Robert E. Lee was a slave owner on a grand scale. The time the rebellion broke out, he was battling in courts to keep slaves he was legally obligated to release. When called upon to defend the United States against all enemies or opposers whatsoever, the words of his commissioning oath, he instead resigned and took command of an army that by then was unquestionably and inarguably defending the institution of slavery. Fort Polk, the Right Reverend Leonidas Polk, was the largest slaveholder in Maury County, Tennessee. At the time, Robert E. Lee was graduating West Point in 1840. By 1850, he had at least 215 slaves. He undoubtedly joined the rebellion to defend slavery. Fort Gordon, Gordon came from a slaveholding family in Georgia. He was deeply invested in the superiority of the white race, was possibly, it is disputed, the head of the KKK in Georgia during the Reconstruction era. Fort Pickett. George Pickett came from a family that owned slaves. He joined the Confederate Army after Bull Run due to a long travel route. He executed prisoners of war under dubious circumstances. Several men that his troops captured were from North Carolina, and when this was found out, they were determined to be traitors against the Confederacy and were summarily executed, which is interesting. His battlefield exploits, today's July 3rd, the anniversary of the Pickett Pettigrew Trimble Charge, which he is most famous for. His military record includes the Battle of Five Forks, which he supposedly commanded, but he actually missed because he was at a shad bake. So instead of leading his troops, he was at a fish fry. And we named a base after him. Fort A.P. Hill. So A.P. Hill was a rare, high-ranking officer in the Confederacy who did not own slaves. But he had no problem joining a rebellion whose root cause was slavery. And he also missed a lot of service time due to illness and was often neglectful of his troops. Fort Rucker. Edmund Rucker's a bit of an odd one. He was from Tennessee. He was a railroad engineer, civilian volunteer for the Confederacy. His state never rebelled, but he and many other people from Western Tennessee did. He does not seem to have owned slaves. It would have been unusual for someone like him. But whatever reason he did, he rebelled against the United States. He fought to protect the institution of slavery. And I mean, he didn't even do particularly well. We just have a base named after him for some reason. Camp Beauregard, perhaps the greatest symbol of what the Confederates idealized, what their nation was formed to defend, was Pierre Gustave Tonton Beauregard. Don't ever ask me to spell his name, I can't. Beauregard came from a family of wealthy gentry, possessing land and slaves in abundance. While later in life, he did drop some of his most odious views, becoming a decent person does not make you deserving of glories, especially balanced against a rebellion in defense of slavery. Our service members go to work every day at these bases. They are constant reminders of a false version of history extolling the patriotism and heroism of people who saw their proper roles as enemies of the United States and defenders of slavery and white supremacy. I want you to take a moment, especially if you are not a person of color, and imagine being a person of color assigned to one of these bases. Are you a young infantry soldier at Benning, named after a man who gave a speech embracing slavery or the cause of the war? Will you be assigned to Fort Hood or Fort Polk? We as a country should honor our actual heroes. There are enough who have served in the U.S. Army deserving of recognition, without honoring those who chose to serve a rebellion against the United States. These names dishonor our service. They dishonor those who chose to serve today, or who choose to serve today, and they dishonor our history. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you learned something. I hope you think about how we remember our heritage. I hope you take that knowledge and push for a better country, a better world, and that you think about how we choose to remember and honor our ancestors and how it affects people today.